Hey, Ginger, this is Joe Amaral calling. How are you?
I'm doing good. I see you're calling from a Canada number.
Yeah, from Toronto.
Oh, okay, because I'm in Detroit and I have a really good friend that lives on the other side of Windsor. So
Oh, okay.
I'm a frequent Canadair.
Ah, well, I'm a frequent American, so there you go.
Most people are if they're close enough to Canada, right? I mean, to
Yeah.
America. They're, I have one of my best friends lives on. She lives in Cottam. It's on the other side of Windsor. It's a real small
Oh,
town.
yeah, yeah,
And so yeah, she comes over all the time because there's stuff that concerts and things that
yeah. Of
churches
course.
put on over here that they never come to Canada. So,
That's
uh,
right. That's right.
well, I'm so glad to talk to you. I'm really interested because I like having an interview where it's something it's new material. It's something that I haven't
That's for
art.
sure.
Yeah, it's like it's not really new material in reality, but it's new as far as someone kind of uh, putting this subject out there like this. But and it's
Yeah, for
funny
sure.
because it's the very first word in the Bible, or the very first sentence, but yet no one's really talked about it like you have. So I'm gonna let you like tell us who you like, what's your background, and so
Sure.
people can kind of get an idea of who you are.
Okay. So you tell me when you're good to go.
Oh no, we're good. I pre-record, so you're good to go.
Okay. 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 So I have been in ministry since 1992. And I've had the opportunity to pastor in different parts of the country. But then in 2002, I went to Israel on a trip, and when I got there, that's really where God began to work in me and change me as I saw the culture of Israel and realized how important it was to understanding the Jewish culture, to understanding our Savior. And so from 2002 till 2016, I served with a ministry that traveled all around the world teaching the church about its, Hebraic roots and getting back to the Jewish culture to understand Jesus. But in the midst of that, I knew that God was kind of getting me ready to move on to something else, but I wasn't sure what He wanted to do. So I took on a position at 100 Huntley Street here in Canada as a co-host, and then I took on a role as a teaching pastor of a large church here in the city. And all that was going really well. But I think we have to go back about 5 years to 2013, where I woke up from a dream that was very, very startling, to say the least. And it had to do with the constellations. I had never, really thought about that before.
Right.
And the more I began to study the constellations, the more I began to see patterns in the sky. And these patterns, to me, were screaming intelligent design. There was no way that all the hundreds of billions of stars, that certain patterns formed and reappeared at significant events, not only through history, but more importantly in the life of Jesus, at His birth, His death, and His resurrection. And so as I started to study the scriptures that talked about stars, space, the sky, constellations, I was overwhelmed by how much the Bible actually had to say about it. So some people will say this is new material, but it's not new material. It's been in the Bible since day one. But I think God is allowing us in this day to see this and realize this, because He's really wanting to tell the world that He has put a story in the stars.
And it's such a cool thing because I don't know, have you ever heard of Owl City, the band?
I haven't.
Okay, well, it's really one guy, but he's a Christian, but he's very popular in the secular world, and he does kind of like techno pop, something like that, I guess you would say. But all of his songs are things like galaxies and fireflies, and they're all about wandering at night, like
Oh,
just
okay.
just being. People are like, "How is he a Christian? These songs aren't really Christian," and it's like, and he's like, "But you don't understand. He was an insomniac, and he would stay up at night, and that's how he kind of got through it. Is he wrote music, and a lot of it is things he saw at night, and he said
Yeah.
it was him being in awe of the universe, and that he writes what he does. It He said, maybe I don't put the words God in there, or Jesus, but it's all celebrating his creation. And I
Very cool.
and I never thought of that, but it's a really, I think it's such an incredible. Now, the name of your book is Story in the Stars: Discovering God's Design and Plan for Our Universe. So I got to get that
That's
out.
right.
And it's available everywhere October 30th from Faith Words.
Hmm.
And so I think this is so incredible because um, I have had a couple of conversations with different people about, when God says He creates the heavens and the earth, because people
Hmm.
have argued with me about, well, why haven't we discovered life on Mars and things like that? And
Sure.
I'm like, well, I'm not really sure we ever will, because He didn't bring it up. I mean, if we do, it's obviously not important. It's like the heavens and the earth. It's like those two things, but we rarely go back to that part of the Bible. And so,
Hmm.
you know, what do you, when you say patterns, what does that mean to you?
Sure. Sure. I mean, think of the sky like one of those massive connect the dot pictures. Remember those in coloring books when we
Oh
were
yeah.
kids? Right? You have this picture with, hundreds of little dots, and you look at it and people say, "What's that image?" You go, "I have no idea." Right? There's no lines, there's no boundaries, there's nothing. But then as you start to connect number one to two to three to four, and you start to go through it, all of a sudden, hidden in the midst of those dots, patterns begin to emerge once the dots are connected. And I began to study the constellations in the sky, and I have to tell you, I was overwhelmed by the odds of almost every major culture in civilization that had a zodiac or had images of the heavens, all had the exact same 48 signs. I mean, how is that possible? If you and I were to go outside and we had no idea what was up there, we just looked up, if you and I both saw the same pattern on our own, that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But then if we saw two patterns on our own and we used the same stars to make that pattern, that would be pretty cool. But what if we saw three? What if we saw four, 5, 48 exactly the same signs and using the same stars? So 5,000 years ago, the Chinese had a zodiac chart, and 6,000 years ago, the Egyptians had a zodiac chart, and the Mesopotamians had one, and the Babylonians had them, and the Jews had them. And they never spoke to each other. They never communicated. But yet today, when we compile all the images, oh my goodness, they're the exact same 48. There's no way that can happen on its own. So for me, these signs of the zodiac, they really do scream of intelligent design. And so as I began to see these patterns in the sky, you go back to Genesis 1:14, and it's very basic. And and there God says that He put the sun, the moon, and the stars in the night to serve as signs to mark sacred days. And I went, okay, what's a sacred day? What's a special day? Well, the day of the birth of the Messiah, the crucifixion of the Messiah, the resurrection. These are important days. And I wonder if there's anything in the Bible that talks about this. Well, for me, the key was when I got to Luke chapter 21, verse 25. And Jesus Himself, He says, listen, there will be signs. What? In the sun, the moon, and the stars. And if you know what a constellation is, it's made up of suns, of stars.
Right.
And then in Matthew 24, He goes further and He says, actually, look up and you'll see the sign of the Son of Man. Where? In the clouds. Look up and you're going to see my sign. And so as I began to, review the dates of the birth, the death, and the resurrection, and I started to use astronomy apps to map out the sky to show me where certain constellations and stars were, I couldn't believe it. The lineups were just too exact to be random. And so the more I studied the patterns, the more impressed, the more sure I became that God really is the one who creates, who names, who places all the stars in the heavens, and He does it because He wants us to know this incredible story of His love for us, a story in the stars.
You know what's interesting is I found kind of some validation and some of the things that you said, because when I was several years ago, a friend of mine, I kept realizing that they never celebrated the Sabbath on the same day, and I was like, can you explain that to me? And so they did, and they gave me a calendar and told me how they, follow it. And I was like, I don't like that's just, that's interesting. Like it stays the same for about 4 weeks and then it changes to the next day. And but they use the same they go by the moon cycle.
That's
They
right. That's
and
right.
and so I will tell you, I started following that same cycle. And
Mm.
my Sabbath has never been more restful and me been more aligned. And
Very cool.
it's not that people can't have another Sabbath day. I know we not it's not for us to just argue with people about it, but for me it felt like, everything was just lined up to do that. And then they started teaching me they celebrate the holy days that are in the Jewish culture that were, back in the Bible that
That's
God
right. In
taught.
Leviticus 23. That's right.
Exactly. And so when these things come up, like they slowly started teaching me as these different feasts and things came up, they would tell me what it was for. And it's so amazing because the calendar that we use makes no sense, but when you go by the moon, it totally makes sense. Like
Hmm.
it all lines up. You don't have a leap year. You don't. I mean, even so, I'm curious when you say, it's mapped out like when the birth of Christ is,
Hmm.
things like that. How do you find out like something like
Sure.
an event like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's back from Genesis, because God says, right, I created the sun, the moon, and the stars to serve as signs. But then He says to mark sacred days. Now, it's interesting. That's English, and English is a really limited language when it comes
Right.
to describing, right, the original Greek or the Hebrew. So the Hebrew word that are used in Genesis 1:14 is moed, moedim, or feasts. So God literally says, I put the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky to let you know when the feasts will take place, when those days will come into being. So I'm like, okay. So I know that Passover takes place at the end of March or mid-April every year. So God says, I'm going to mark that feast with signs in the sky. So you look up at the sky using your star app for March and April. What's the dominant sign in the sky? It's the sign of Aries. I'm like, okay, hang on a second. Aries is a goat, sometimes seen as a lamb. So I think about it. On earth, while the people are sacrificing lambs for the remission of sin, God puts a lamb in the sky to remind them that He's going to send them a lamb. In Genesis 22, when Abraham is getting ready to sacrifice Isaac during Passover, God provides a goat for him to die in his place. What's in the sky that same night? A goat. So God marks the holy days with these signs because they didn't have calendars back then. So when you saw Aries in the sky, you knew Passover was at hand. So God literally has placed images in the heavens because we're a very visual people.
Right.
Right. When you go back to a cave that's thousands of years old, very seldom do you see handwriting.
It's pictures.
Always pictures, exactly.
Yeah.
Almost like a little mini comic strip. 4 or 5 images can tell you an entire story. So what does God do? He does it this way, so that no matter what language you speak or don't speak, doesn't matter how old you are, what age or era you live in, if you have the ability to look up and see images, you can understand His story. So what better way to do it than with stars in the sky, so that for all of eternity, the story is literally rotating every year like a massive PowerPoint show that never ends. So no matter how long you live or don't live, you can look up and you can see the story. To me, it's stunning to understand the length, the measures that God went to ensure that every person in the earth would have the ability to look up and see His message of love.
And and the sun and the moon lines up because the Sabbath and the different days starting at sundown, and then ending at sundown the next day. So I mean, he literally turns the lights off, like and he, you know what I mean. He turns the lights off, and says, "Okay, this is it," and then and then when the lights go off again, that's the end of the Sabbath. It really it's a little easier to like make sense of it for me, to do it this way. And I've learned about and I have friends of mine that ask me, "Are you Jewish? Like, why do you celebrate the Sabbath that way?" And I said, "No, It's just after studying it and after, talking with people that, are Christians, but, go back to the different Jewish feast and things like that, and especially the Sabbath and the way how did they know it was a Sabbath? They went by the moon cycle, and when the sun came up and the sun go down, those are, the sun or sundown one day and the sundown the next day, and everything has that, that time period, and it's so cool because it's like there's a watch, like a calendar and a watch in the
It's a
sky.
calendar. That's exactly right. That's
Yeah,
what it is. It's a calendar.
it's so
And
fascinating.
it's a calendar that God set in place right at the beginning of space and time. And he said, whenever you want to know what's going on, all you have to do is look up. I've written it in the sky. And I understand sometimes why, some Christians want to shy away from the constellations because of, the taboo nature of the zodiac and things like horoscopes. I mean, God forbids that very strong in Jeremiah 8. He warns us not to consult the stars.
Right.
He's very clear about that. But what we have to understand is that the stars weren't created for us to look at ourselves. It's the exact opposite. He creates the stars because the Bible says that the heavens declare the glory of God, and that they pour forth speech, and they speak and they talk and they reveal knowledge. And so the whole universe exists to declare this glory of God. And if you go to Hebrews 1 and 3, it says the glory of God is the Son, Jesus, who is the exact representation of the Father. So the heavens literally exist to declare Christ, to declare Jesus, to point us to him. So for me, as a Christian, as a pastor, I have no problem looking at the stars because I know they point to him. And that's what I love about the book Story in the Stars. It's never pointing people to me. It's never pointing people to horoscopes. It's lifting up the name of Christ and pointing people to him. And even already as I've been traveling into Asia and different parts of the world teaching this, the people coming to faith in God is incredible because they're blown away that God would go to such lengths to write this love story in the heavens. It's such a beautiful thing.
And when you know that stars, you know, and when you hear about stars having a lifespan, and that the star you're seeing is something that's been dead. Of course, you hear the 1 billion years ago, which
Right,
is I mean, who knows? I mean, God. God existed way before He created us. So, but it's so interesting to I don't know, like this entire subject is it should be talked about more because I think you're right. They like as soon as you hear somebody talking about stars, they think a soothsayer, somebody who's going to tell your fortune and according I see it in the stars, but for me, I grew up in Texas, and like for me, I don't know if you've ever been to Texas, but to me, the sky, it's enormous. Yeah, like, and we have a family farm down there that's about 150 acres, and and it's so open. There's nothing but horses and cows, and other animals. But I mean, just going out there, even especially going out there with the horses, like at night when the stars are out. I mean, it's just like you're walking through God's painting or something, and it's just so massive. And if stars, my theory with the stars and whether or not they die off and they don't exist again, how are we seeing the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper all the time? Like, if they eventually die off like that, I don't understand all of that speech. I just know, whether you make a pan out of it or a horse or whatever you draw the connect the dots, they stay the same. Like, you're right. I mean, they're always there. Like,
they're always there, and they're consistent, Ginger, throughout different cultures, and that's what blows my mind. Is that all these different cultures who live thousands of years and thousands of miles away from each other all saw the same 48 signs, and they all have the same names, and they all have the same meanings. So if you take out a star map, and I have this in the book, where we have this map laid out, and you look at the placement of the constellations in the sky, and you start to see where certain ones are, you begin to see a story, like a comic strip. Oh, look at that symbol, and that one points to that one, and that one points to that one, and before you know it, 3 or 4 symbols in, you're like, oh my goodness, that's John 3:16, or that's when he was in the temple. You can see his light. It's literally written in the stars. Why? Because the heavens declare the glory of God, and the glory of God is Jesus. So we should not be surprised that the story of his life, his death, and his resurrection are in the heavens. But like I've said before, it's the greatest PowerPoint in the history of mankind, and it's eternal.
And what's really cool is it's like it's also a GPS. You know,
that's right.
I mean, that's how ships guided where they went. That's how they found Jesus. You know, the star that was in the sky. You know, like everything that. I mean, when there was no highways and directions and freeway signs and like GPS. I mean, that was their
GPS.
their GPS and their calendar and their watch, everything related to the sun, the moon, and the stars. So I'm glad to talk to you because I already had so many, like I've been, my eyes opened so much when I started to study the Jewish, like aspects of in the Bible of how they went about celebrating different feasts and the Sabbath and everything else. And it was like, this all revolves around his creation. So that's, that makes sense to celebrate it on days and times of the day when his creation tells you to. It's amazing to me. I cannot wait to read your book. And I think now, is there a website for people to go and learn more and to order your book?
Yeah, if they go to storyinthestars.com, that'll take them to my website. But depending on where you live, in the United States, I mean, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, local Christian bookstores, all those places will have it in stock on the 30th, and you can pick it up there, or you can order it online for sure.
Well, I'm so honored to talk to you, and thank you for writing this book because now that I have already kind of delved into this world of the signs of the universe like this, I'm so excited to read this, and especially to see how you map everything out and its relation to scripture and everything. I'm really excited to read it because I'm already super interested in this topic.
Well,
so
that's cool.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're interested, and I'd love to talk to you again after you read the book. I'd love to get some of your thoughts on some of the conclusions that I reached. That'd be cool.
Exactly. Well, we will share this interview online on our social media. Can we tag you on Twitter or anything? Do you have a Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah. I should get your email because I'll send you like all my Twitter, all my handles on social media. And all that
yeah, that would be great.
Okay, let me just pop in your email here. What's the best place to email you at?
It's the overdrivefm at Gmail.
Overdrive FM. Okay. Gmail. Okay, I'll send that through to you, Ginger.
All right.
Gmail.com, you said?
Yep.
Okay, super.
You didn't say A at the end of that.
I'm Canadian, but I'm not that Canadian.
Yeah, my friend that lives over on the other side of Windsor, she's more American than Canadian, and so every rare once in a while she'll say A, and I'll point it out to her, and she'll go, "Oh, I said that, didn't I?" But she doesn't have any kind of an accent. You don't either. But her husband, who grew up in the same area, he has the traditional Canadian accent. It's so thick. But she doesn't have one at all, and her kids don't have one either. It's just so funny. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a Portuguese background, but I was born in Portugal but raised here, and I just never caught like some of the local stuff. The "Hey, how's it going, eh?" I mean, I'm sure I say it from time to time, but it's not in my everyday vernacular.
Yeah, well, I'm from Texas, and I never say y'all.
Y'all. Yeah.
I guess I used to when I was younger. But, I although I can go down for 2 or 3 weeks, I go down and help with the horses when the babies are born and things like that, and help, train or break some of the new horses. And when I go down there, I do come back to Michigan.
Come back.
Yeah, right. When I come back, my kids especially will say, "You been to Texas, Mama? Have you been? You sure sound like you've been in the South." And it really is, but it's almost like I can't communicate with my relatives without using an accent because I feel like they don't understand me if I don't say y'all and and
Yeah.
you know, Yontu and Over Yonder, and like that's their great design of you know, direction. Over Yonder, you know, over out,
Yeah.
over out in there. Yeah. Well,
That's cool.
I am so excited to read your book, and like I said, we edit the interview obviously,
Sure, sure.
and we make us sound really good. take out
Okay.
take out all the blank
Yeah.
spaces, but we'll put
Yeah.
it up on
Send
YouTube.
me a link.
I will,
I'd love to post that. Yeah.
and we will air it this coming Monday, because we already have like a couple of interviews that are going on for the rest of the week. But
Oh, Monday, great.
yeah, we'll air it on Monday, and then we will share it, like I said, on your social media and tag you. And then, you know, that way, if anybody wants to kind of hear the heart behind your book, they can go to that. And it's just a YouTube audio link that just
Oh, perfect. Okay.
so, you know, basically it'll just have a picture of your book and the audio playing in the background. So
Right.
YouTube is kind of universal for people wherever they're at.
Oh, yeah.
And my friend in Canada, like, there's some things she can't, like, you know, view, and YouTube is something that every part of the world seems to be able to listen to YouTube. So
Exactly. Okay.
all right. Well,
Okay.
I'm excited. Thank you so much for doing the
thank you.
interview. Well, we
Okay,
will
thanks,
talk to you soon, and I'm grabbing that book right now. I have that Amazon Audible, and I love that, but this one I got to have the actual book.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thanks again for having me on. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you so much.